My child, the wedding was supposed to be the moment when everything became permanent, but just before the final decision was made, your soulmate's mother heard a private conversation that was never meant for her ears. And the moment she heard your name, she stopped walking. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions. She simply stood there, listening as one hidden truth after another began to surface. Listen carefully, because what she heard about you changed the entire direction of that wedding. For weeks, everyone around your soulmate had been acting as though the past was finished. The invitations had been sent, the arrangements had been made, and the family had convinced themselves that your soulmate was ready to move forward. From the outside, everything looked settled. But deep inside, your soulmate had never truly found peace. There was still a part of their heart connected to a story nobody wanted to discuss anymore, a story connected to you. Your soulmate's mother had noticed it. She had seen those quiet moments when everyone else was celebrating but your soulmate seemed somewhere far away. She had noticed how quickly their expression changed whenever someone accidentally mentioned the past. But she kept telling herself that it was only nervousness. She believed the wedding would eventually erase whatever remained unfinished. Then came that private conversation. It happened away from the celebration, behind a partially closed door where two people believed nobody could hear them. Your soulmate's mother was passing by when she suddenly heard your name. At first, she intended to keep walking. But then she heard something that made her freeze. One voice quietly said, "They never stopped loving that person." There was silence. Then the other voice answered, "I know." But nobody ever told them the full truth about why everything ended. Your soulmate's mother felt her heart drop. She moved closer without making a sound. What she heard next made everything she believed about your love story begin to collapse. Someone had interfered. Someone had allowed your soulmate to believe that you had walked away without caring. Someone had convinced them that your silence meant rejection, when the reality was far more complicated. And according to that private conversation, there had been information about you that never reached your soulmate at all. Suddenly, your soulmate's mother remembered every time your soulmate had tried to pretend they were fine. She remembered the nights they became unusually quiet. She remembered the anger that appeared whenever your name came up, not because there was no love left, but because the love had never received a truthful ending. My child, this was the moment she realized something terrifying. Her child might be standing only hours away from making a lifelong commitment while still carrying an unfinished love inside their heart. But the conversation wasn't finished. One of the voices said something even more disturbing. If they knew what you actually tried to do before everything fell apart, this wedding might never happen. Your soulmate's mother covered her mouth. She wanted to walk into that room immediately, but she forced herself to listen. She needed the whole truth before confronting anyone. Then she heard about a message, something connected to you that had supposedly been kept away from your soulmate. A message that could have changed everything if it had arrived at the right time. That was enough. Your soulmate's mother stepped away from the door and walked directly toward the wedding area. Her face had changed completely. Family members tried to stop her and ask what was wrong, but she ignored them. She had only one goal now: speak to your soulmate before another promise was made. When she finally reached them, your soulmate immediately knew something had happened. Their mother looked directly into their eyes and said, "I need you to answer one question before you go any further. If what you believed about you and that person was based on a lie, would you still make this decision today?" Your soulmate went completely silent. People nearby began looking at each other. Nobody understood why your name had suddenly become part of a wedding that was supposed to have nothing to do with you. Then your soulmate whispered, "Why are you asking me this now?" Their mother answered, "Because I just heard something I should have heard a long time ago." Your soulmate's expression changed instantly. And then came the question their mother was almost afraid to ask. Did you ever stop loving them? Your soulmate tried to answer, but no words came. That silence answered everything. Their mother reached for their hand and said, "Then I cannot stand here and watch you promise your future to someone while your heart is still waiting for the truth about your past." The room erupted with questions. Some family members demanded that the ceremony continue. Others insisted that this was not the right time to reopen an old story. But your soulmate's mother refused to move. "No," she said. "This wedding stops until my child knows exactly what happened." Your soulmate stared at her in disbelief. For perhaps the first time, someone inside the family was not telling them to forget you. Someone was finally saying that the truth mattered more than appearances, arrangements, expectations, or embarrassment. But there was still one thing your soulmate didn't know. Their mother had not told them the most important sentence she heard during that private conversation. Because just before she walked away from that door, one person had whispered something that changed the situation completely. You never abandoned them. You were waiting for them to discover what someone else had done. And when your soulmate's mother finally repeated those words, your soulmate's eyes filled with tears, every memory returned at once. Every unanswered question. Every moment they had wondered why something between you felt unfinished. Every time they had tried to convince themselves that moving forward was the only choice. Now there was another possibility. Maybe the love story hadn't ended because love disappeared. Maybe it ended because the truth disappeared first. Don't skip what comes next, because your soulmate's mother was about to reveal exactly who was speaking behind that door, and why that person had remained silent until the day of the wedding. Your soulmate looked at their mother and asked, "Who told you this?" She hesitated. Because the answer was someone your soulmate trusted. Someone who had been close enough to know what happened between you. Someone who had watched your soulmate suffer while keeping a piece of the truth hidden. And when their mother finally said the name, your soulmate stepped backward in complete disbelief. The wedding was no longer the biggest thing happening that day. The real story had just begun. Because now your soulmate wanted the one thing everyone had tried to prevent for far too long. The complete truth about you. The name your soulmate's mother finally spoke was the last name anyone expected to hear. Your soulmate stood completely still, staring at her as if they had misunderstood. This wasn't some stranger from the past. This wasn't someone who had heard pieces of the story from other people. This was someone who had been close enough to watch everything fall apart, someone your soulmate had trusted during the darkest days after losing you. And now, suddenly, that same person was connected to a private conversation suggesting that the entire story about you had never been told honestly. Your soulmate immediately demanded to see them. The wedding could wait. The guests could whisper. The family could argue. None of that mattered anymore. There was only one question burning inside your soulmate now: what happened between us that I was never allowed to know? Their mother tried to calm them, but years of buried emotion had already broken through. Your soulmate had spent so long believing that you chose silence, that you stopped fighting, that perhaps you simply decided life would be easier without them. But now every painful assumption was beginning to look like something carefully constructed around them. When the person was finally brought into the room, the atmosphere changed instantly. They looked at your soulmate, then at their mother, and immediately understood that the private conversation had been overheard. Nobody needed to explain anything. Your soulmate walked toward them and asked only one thing: "Did you try to reach me?" The person lowered their eyes. That hesitation was devastating. "Answer me," your soulmate said again. "Did you try to reach me after everything happened?" Finally, the person whispered, "Yes." Your soulmate's face went pale. "How many times?" Another silence. "More than once." Those 3 words shattered years of certainty. Your soulmate turned away, struggling to understand what they had just heard. They remembered waiting for you. They remembered checking for something that never arrived. They remembered eventually deciding that your silence was the answer. But now they were being told that silence had never truly existed. Your soulmate's mother stepped forward. "Tell everything. Not tomorrow. Not after the wedding. Right now." The person's eyes filled with fear because the truth was much larger than one missing message. There had been conversations that were never passed along. There had been assumptions deliberately encouraged. Every time your soulmate began wondering whether they should search for you, someone had reminded them of the pain. Every time they questioned whether you truly stopped caring, someone had pushed them toward the easiest explanation: forget you and move forward. But that wasn't what shocked your soulmate most. The person admitted that shortly before the separation became permanent, you had asked for one final chance to explain everything face to face. Your soulmate looked up sharply. "You knew that?" "Yes." "And you never told me?" "I thought I was protecting you." Your soulmate laughed once, but there was no happiness in it. It was the sound of someone realizing how much of their life had been shaped by another person's decision. "Protecting me?" they asked. "You watched me believe they didn't care. You watched me spend all this time trying to understand why they disappeared. And you call that protection?" The person began crying. They insisted they had believed the relationship was creating too much pain. They believed separating you both would eventually help everyone move forward. They never expected your soulmate to carry those feelings for so long. They never expected your name to remain hidden inside every major decision. But your soulmate's mother interrupted. That still isn't everything I heard. Everyone became silent again. She looked directly at the person and said, "Tell them about the last message." The person froze. Your soulmate noticed immediately. "What last message?" Nobody answered. "What message?" Their voice was louder now. Finally, the truth came out. There had been one final message from you. Not an ordinary goodbye. Not an angry accusation. It was something deeply personal. In that message, you had explained why you became quiet, why you stepped away, and why you believed continuing to fight at that moment might only create more damage. But there was also one sentence that nobody had ever shown your soulmate. The person slowly repeated it. "Tell them I never stopped caring. If they ever learn the truth, they'll know where my heart really was." Your soulmate broke. They sat down, covering their face as years of anger suddenly collided with grief. They had built an entire emotional wall around the belief that you abandoned them. They had forced themselves to become colder whenever someone mentioned you. They had tried to build a different future because they believed the past had already chosen its ending. But you had never given them the ending they thought you did. Someone else had written that ending for both of you. Your soulmate's mother sat beside them. She didn't tell them what decision to make. She simply said, "Whatever happens after today must be your decision. Not mine. Not theirs. Not this family's. Yours. But you cannot make it without knowing the truth." Outside that room, the wedding guests were becoming restless. Questions were spreading. The future spouse's family wanted answers. People were asking why everything had suddenly stopped. Some relatives demanded that the private matter be handled after the ceremony. But your soulmate stood up. "No. There will be no ceremony until I understand everything." That sentence changed the entire atmosphere. For the first time, your soulmate was choosing truth over pressure. Then they turned back toward the person who had hidden the message. "Where is it?" The person looked confused. "The message," your soulmate said. "Where is the original message?" Their expression changed. And your soulmate immediately realized something else had been hidden. The message still existed. It had never been destroyed. Your soulmate's mother asked the person to bring it immediately. But instead of moving, they stood frozen. Their hands began trembling. That was when your soulmate understood that there was something inside that message even their mother had not heard about. "Why are you afraid to show it to me?" The person whispered, "Because there's another part." Your soulmate stared at them. "What part?" The person took a deep breath. "The part where you explained who actually caused the misunderstanding between you two." Everything went silent. Suddenly, this was no longer only about a hidden message. Someone had actively influenced the separation, and according to what you had written, that person was much closer to the family than anyone imagined. Your soulmate demanded the message immediately. Minutes later, the original message was finally placed into their hands. Their fingers trembled as they began reading. The first lines confirmed everything they had just heard. You had tried to explain. You had asked for a conversation. You had admitted that walking away was never what your heart wanted. Then your soulmate reached the final section. They stopped breathing for a moment. Their mother watched their expression change. What does it say? Your soulmate didn't answer. They simply continued reading until one particular name appeared. And when they saw it, tears disappeared from their face. Something stronger replaced them. Shock. Because the person named in your message wasn't standing somewhere far away. That person was at the wedding. And according to your message, they had known the truth from the very beginning. Your soulmate folded the message slowly and looked toward the door. Their mother asked, "Where are you going?" Your soulmate answered, "I'm going to ask them why they destroyed something they had no right to touch." Don't skip what happens next, because your soulmate was no longer searching for explanations. They were walking directly toward the person whose name had remained hidden for years. The guests watched as your soulmate entered the main room holding your message. The music had already stopped. The ceremony had already been paused. But nobody understood why your soulmate was now walking directly toward one particular person in the crowd. That person saw the message in your soulmate's hand. Their face immediately changed. Your soulmate stopped in front of them and asked quietly, "Do you recognize this?" No answer. "Do you recognize it?" Finally, the person whispered, "Yes." Your soulmate's mother arrived behind them. And now everyone knew something serious was about to happen. Your soulmate looked directly into that person's eyes and asked the question that had been waiting for years. "Why did you make me believe you had abandoned me?" The person looked around at the family, realizing there was nowhere left to hide. Then they said something nobody expected. "Because if you had known the truth back then, you would have chosen you over everyone standing in this room." Your soulmate froze. But the confession wasn't finished. Because the next thing this person revealed would explain not only why your love story was broken apart, but why someone had been terrified that you might return before this wedding ever happened. The entire room went silent after those words. Your soulmate stood there holding the message, staring at the person who had finally admitted what had been hidden for so long. "You would have chosen you over everyone standing in this room." That sentence changed everything. Suddenly, your soulmate understood why so many conversations had been discouraged, why every attempt to revisit the past had been shut down, and why people had worked so hard to convince them that forgetting you was the only healthy choice. It had never been, because everyone believed the love was gone. Some of them had been afraid that the love was still strong enough to survive the truth. Your soulmate's mother stepped forward and demanded the complete story. There would be no more half confessions, no more missing messages, and no more decisions made behind closed doors. The person finally admitted that when your relationship began falling apart, certain members of the family had become convinced that you would eventually pull your soulmate away from the future they had imagined for them. They feared losing influence. They feared your soulmate making choices independently. So when misunderstandings appeared between you, instead of helping both of you communicate, they allowed those misunderstandings to grow. Messages were delayed. Important words were never delivered. Your silence was described as rejection, while your attempts to explain were dismissed as something your soulmate supposedly did not need to hear. Your soulmate looked around the room, devastated. "So all those years I thought you gave up on me." Their mother answered softly, "You were never given the complete truth." That realization hurt more than anger ever could. Your soulmate remembered every night they had questioned whether they had meant anything to you. Every time they had nearly searched for you but stopped because they were afraid of discovering you had moved on. Every time someone told them, "If you cared, you would have come back." Now they understood how unfair that sentence had been. You had tried. You had left words behind. You had asked for the opportunity to explain. But the truth had been intercepted before it ever reached the person who needed it most. Then your soulmate looked toward the wedding decorations surrounding them. Everything had been prepared perfectly, yet nothing felt right anymore. Their future spouse was waiting for an answer, the families were watching, and dozens of people expected the ceremony to continue. But your soulmate's mother walked beside them and said something that finally removed the pressure: "Do not marry because everyone is already here. Do not marry because invitations were sent or promises were announced. A wedding can be postponed. A decision made against your own heart can follow you for the rest of your life." Your soulmate closed their eyes. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then they turned toward the person they were supposed to marry and apologized. There was no cruelty in their voice. There was no attempt to blame an innocent person for what had happened years earlier. Your soulmate simply admitted that continuing the wedding while carrying unresolved feelings and newly discovered truths would be unfair to everyone involved. And then came the decision. The wedding cannot continue today. Gasps moved through the room. Some relatives protested immediately. Others demanded that your soulmate reconsider. But their mother stood beside them and said, "Enough." For years, other people have been making emotional decisions for them. Today they make their own. Your soulmate removed themselves from the ceremony and walked outside, still holding your message. Away from the voices, away from the questions, they read your words again from beginning to end. This time they weren't reading them through anger. They were reading them knowing that the story they had believed for years had been incomplete. Then they reached the final words you had written. Words nobody had allowed them to see when they mattered most. You had never demanded that they wait forever. You had never asked them to destroy their future for you. You had simply wanted them to know that what happened between you was not the result of your heart suddenly becoming empty. That was when your soulmate finally cried without trying to hide it. Their mother found them outside and sat quietly beside them. After a long silence, your soulmate asked, "What am I supposed to do now?" She answered, "Find the truth for yourself. And when you find it, decide with your own heart." Your soulmate looked down at your message. For the first time in years, your name no longer represented abandonment. It represented an unanswered conversation. They didn't know whether time had changed you. They didn't know whether you would answer. They didn't even know whether the two of you could ever rebuild what had been broken. But they knew one thing with absolute certainty: they could no longer live with a story written by everyone except the two people who actually lived it. So your soulmate made one final decision that day. They asked for a way to contact you. Not to make impossible promises. Not to pretend the lost years had never happened. Not to demand that you return. They wanted one honest conversation. One conversation without family interference. Without hidden messages. Without someone deciding which truths you were allowed to hear. And when your soulmate finally held the phone in their hand, their mother looked at them and said, "Whatever happens next, at least this time the truth will reach both of you." Your soulmate stared at your name for several seconds before sending a simple message. "I finally know you tried to reach me. I finally know what happened. If you're willing, there are things I need to say, and things I should have heard from you a long time ago." Then they pressed send. There was no guarantee of what would happen next. And maybe that was the most important part of all. Because this story was never truly about forcing two people back together. It was about finally removing the lies that had kept them apart and allowing both hearts to make their own decision. The wedding had stopped. The hidden conversation had been exposed. The message had finally reached the person it was meant for. And your soulmate's mother, the woman who once believed the past should remain buried, became the person who refused to let another lifelong decision be built on a lie. Whatever happens between you and your soulmate from here belongs to the two of you. But one thing can never be taken away again: the truth. Because sometimes love doesn't disappear when two people separate. Sometimes it becomes buried beneath fear, pressure, misunderstanding, and words that never reached their destination. And when the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't promise that everything will return to the way it was. It simply gives two people something they should have had from the beginning: the freedom to choose after knowing the whole story.